added another layer on top. He knows some very good players. Actually, jazz is
matter where you're tuning in, either from Facebook, YouTube, or our TICA participant from our Zoom sessions. Thank you very much. My name is Louis Siu, the Artistic Director of Toolbox Percussions, the presenter of Toolbox International Creative Academy, TICA. TICA was founded in 2019 as a new platform for alternative art educations. TICA enhances cultural exchange through connecting students, faculties, young professionals, and music lovers. TICA also as a creative incubators where we commission new music and co-create new ideas. And more importantly, TICA contribute back to our community where we plan to plant seed for the future of art and culture in Hong Kong, for future art development for artistic excellency. This year we have a topic featuring on how to sustain creative impact through amid crisis. And tonight, it's my greatest honor to have my friends and fellow colleagues to join us for this panel discussions. From my right, we have Dr. Fung Lam, the Artistic Director of the Hong Kong Contemporary Music Group. We have Timothy Page, faculty of the Hong Kong University of Science and Technologies, and Dr. Matthew Schreibeis, faculty at the Hong Kong Baptist University. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you.
So we were talking about this panel discussion that to make things relatively related to what we've been going through, because you guys are also jury members at our composition competitions earlier. And we talked about creativities as always. So tonight I think we want to focus on just one big question on what is creativity, how you're going to create, etc., etc. So what about you start first, Fung? What is a creative process for you, or what is creative?
Well, I'm very happy to be joining this panel tonight. I think every time I receive an inquiry or a commission, it's different. You know, and what I would usually like to find out first is what kind of occasion it will be. If I'm writing a new piece, apart from the obvious like duration and who is playing it, and I also would like to find out what else is happening in the same concert. Maybe that's my kind of curator hat. That I always like to know what else is happening in the same evening, and try to actually contribute something that I know will be different from what is already there. So that's a little example that I could share. Mm-hmm. Actually, it was my first orchestral work back in maybe 2005. It was one of those young composers scheme where a few young composers got to write a new piece for orchestra, and I knew that the other three composers would probably be writing a piece that showcases the orchestration, the instrumentation of a contemporary orchestra kind of to the full. And somehow I didn't want to do that. And so what I ended up writing was a piece that is very subtle in terms of orchestration, basically slow throughout the entire 12 minutes or so, and created a piece that contrasts actually vastly with the other three. It's not right or wrong, but that's just an approach that I sometimes would do when I have to write a new work. And each project is different. Obviously, you would respond to the occasion. If it's for some orchestra's anniversary, then you're not going to write a adagio for strings. If you want to, it's okay, but that's, try to work for the occasion. That's kind of one of my approaches. Yes.
That does remind me, like when I first asked you for a piece, roughly a decade ago already. Mm. So the email you keep asking me is like, where is your piece going to be in the program? At that point, I still have no ideas. It was the two piano, two percussions.
Yes.
Concert.
Square.
Yeah. So it was very interesting, and I understand your standpoint as we collaborate more. That when we're working with composer now, we're not just asking for someone to write a piece, right? The occasions and the meaning behind that is important. And yeah, it was an interesting process that made me wanted to get into more of the creative process with the composer along the way. I think this is how we have to expand our repertoire as percussionists in a way. Otherwise, we can't be just like a string player to grab something from the past and then just play it. Of course, we can interpret that differently every time, but I think the experience is unique, I think, every time.
And if you don't mind me sharing another little approach, for example, we mentioned composing for percussion, and it's more often than not that compositions for percussion concentrate more on the rhythmic side of music. So when I wrote for percussion only, I try to explore the softer, more subtle side of percussion. So that's just another little example.
Talking about subtlety, Tim, your piece we heard last year with Freckles Percussions, with all the waters and the sand and stuff, is very interesting. Would you like to share a little bit on that?
Sure, and apropos this question of creativity and how we generate ideas for our pieces. My work, I do partially fully instrumental music, and on the other hand, I do music that can incorporate visual aspects, theatrical aspects, physical materials that aren't normally associated with being musical instruments. And in this percussion piece, I had the starting point was actually some copper pipes that I just found around my ex-girlfriend's apartment when it was being remodeled, and I started playing around with these pipes in some water, and started figuring out what kind of noises I could get out of the pipes using some water. So I had kind of like a reservoir of sonic ideas that I started to generate in that way. But then, and this sort of touches on this other part of my compositional interests, namely visual elements and theater and so forth. I started to think about different things that we associate with water and water containers and so forth. And then it became this sort of chain of extra musical associations. I happened to be interested in Japanese tea ceremony at the time, and it somehow brought to mind tea ceremony, this water in a container and emptying water and so forth. And I started kind of incorporating some visual references to tea ceremony and various aspects of the choreography that happen in that piece, the motions that the players undertake. And then that brought me to sort of other aspects of Japanese aesthetic, and there's sort of a rock garden sequence that happens in that piece. So it's this sort of a chain of associations that goes, in my case at least, beyond the actual music itself, beyond pitch, rhythm, harmony, etc.
For the aesthetic outlook of how you make that the sand rock on the tom-tom makes the beauty of the whole piece. When all the musicians walk off the stage, the action camera really just capturing that. It's beyond just music, I think, at that moment. So visually, it's out of people's imagination that you were just thinking you're making music through the pipes and water, but instead of you actually seeing artwork in process making, if I can put it that way. So it was very enjoyable, and we hope to play that again in Hong Kong at some point, of course. Yeah. And speaking of Japan, right? And Matthew, I know you have some experience in Korea.
Yeah.
You're teaching there, and I'm not sure if that have some influences of what makes you end up to Hong Kong and something that enhance your creative process.
Yeah, I guess in a way that's true. I have a series of pieces that are for traditional Korean instruments, or some with Korean instrument and Western instruments, and I have pieces that have poetry in Korean and English and things like that. So that's one aspect of what I've been interested in. I think to the broader question of kind of how we go about our work, at least at the beginning. I guess what I think about at the beginning are we have different types of limitations in the project that we're going to pursue. And I mean limitation in a kind of good way. So the first kind of question, although it's the simplest one, has to do with the length of this piece. And if we have a piece that's going to be 3 minutes or 13 or 30 minutes, these are really, really different scenarios. And I guess what I think about at the beginning are, I have these certain instruments, let's say, that I'm going to work with, and they have certain potential, basically. And what is the potential that I want to pursue in this certain time frame, and the type of drama or emotion and other types of expression that are going to happen in this set length that I have to work with. That's the first thing. Another thing that I might mention is that I think that a lot of the background for at least my creative work, and maybe it's the same for you guys, it could be something that we have thought about much earlier than this particular assignment. So I feel like we have the compositional work that we're doing right at this moment for certain projects, but some of that has kind of been set up in some interests and things we've been thinking about maybe even years earlier, that they kind of, they're generating over a long time span.
Yes, I agree. I think it's like we have some ideas stored in a drawer, and then the right moment, the right commission comes, and then we pick the ones that are suitable. And it's same for, I think, a lot of film composers. They have like a little bit of this and that, stored away, and then when the right moment comes.
It's true. Like we had a conversation earlier this year, last year actually, with Matthew, that something I want to do with percussion and outside of the concert hall, and then we're already thinking, oh, maybe we should do this and that, but we never know when is the right moment, and especially we want to do it outside of the concert hall. Firstly, we cannot get in the concert hall now, and now we cannot get on the street 1 or 2 persons. So, I mean, different time of the situation that we cannot go ahead the creative process. So we might have to keep it in ourselves until later, which is good too, because we're not just here to wait for something to come, right? And for the Mahjong project we did a little bit, originally it was a concert piece, and then it kind of gradually evolved into an installation performance.
Yes.
So I think that is something out of your expectation and my expectation as well.
It was a very fun project. Again, I was kind of reacting to the rest of the program. I already knew what you had in that concert, and I thought it might be nice to have a little space to have a really unusual, very experimental, almost like an art installation work in the middle of that concert. And for people who didn't know, it's basically a work that are performed by 4 percussionists who could play mahjong. And I set up the mahjong in a very specific way, so each tiles are kind of predetermined. And there is only one outcome to that game, and it's an outcome that is basically extremely unlikely to happen in real life. So I was kind of bringing the sound of non-musical events into the concert hall and arranged it slightly so that every performance would be the same in terms of when a player is going to shout pong or sang or gong, or when they finish the game and how they finish. But then I also introduced some elements that is kind of cage, which is I included the radio on the side, and of course we don't know what we'll be playing during the performance, right. And that kind of indicates the different movements of the piece. And that was just a nice little example of
writing. Was it algorithmic in any way? Are you in complete control over every choice about the sound that you're making in every point of the composition, or does the outcome of the Mahjong game somehow determine the musical events that are happening? Is this something that 2 ways you can confront a span of music. You know, among the ways you can confront creating a span of music is to create a process and then have the process sort of determine the sound that's generated in the composition, or you can kind of take it event by event and make a conscious choice about every event.
That particular work has 2 layers. One layer, everything was predetermined. So I know exactly when each player would do which action in the game. But also I wrote an instruction allowing them to actually chit-chat, just like friends would when they play games, the radio element. That is something that I decided to kind of let go of the complete control. So it was a mix. Basically, I kind of see that piece as an organization of sound events, more so than like a traditional composition. And yeah.
I think having the chance music happening is important because you can infuse the artist or musician's creativity inside what the composer you guys want us to interpret. We can. It's a guessing game in a way. That sometimes we'll discover new ideas as well. So Tim, you're sharing with me of the timpani project you've done before. So that is something pretty interesting. Would you like to share a little bit on that?
Sure. This is a work in progress. I've done a couple of pieces in which I've used a timpani in a way that a timpani is not normally used. The first thing I did was to create a prototype kind of robot timpani that has a robotic arm that adjusts the pedal, and then I use a speaker driver as the activator of the timpani head. So it allows the possibility of having a fixed media piece essentially on timpani, where you feed in some kind of sound file through the speaker driver, and then you program a trajectory of the timpani pedal through time. This is a project that's been on the back burner now for like 5 years. I have the prototype, but I just schedule as such that I haven't created the finished product with that. But then I did another piece a couple of years later where we had the speaker driver on the timpani head, and it was actually a cellist playing, and the sound of the cello was amplified through the timpani via the speaker driver, and the cellist used the timpani pedal to adjust the tension, and that acted as kind of a spectral filter for the cello sound. And then there were some other shenanigans using objects on the timpani head and so forth, and there was a video element where I kind of explored the notion of this hybrid instrument of a timpani plus a cello, something in between.
That's interesting. So Matthew, what do you think of, are these 2 guys doing something very innovative or creative? What do you see?
Or not?
I think so. Yes, I think they are. And I think the interesting thing with percussion, at least in my view, Tim said doing something which is not the usual thing to do with timpani, but percussion I feel is kind of more open. It has more openness, or more kind of exploration about it, like with its development in the 20th century. And I guess, we will see some of that in the pieces here today.
Right. Yeah. Before we're moving on, I would like to encourage everyone tuning in, either on Facebook or the Zoom session, that if you have any question, just type up in the chat room, and we'll answer them accordingly. And just join us too. We try to be as interactive as possible under the situations. And I think percussions that keep me alive in a way that I can try different things. And especially, I like to play extremely loud and extremely soft. Nothing in the middle. But for me, extremely loud is because we kind of legally get the license to do that, right? And extremely soft for me is most likely for playing something like a pair of crash cymbals, very soft, the Rachmaninoff piano concerto, those excerpts.
I love that.
Yeah, and then also my just own snare drum or timpani practice, because there's a certain sense of the zen of that. You have to really focus on making the sound consistent. I just love chewing on that. So I spent hours in practice room when I was in school. Every Saturday morning, just 3 hours straight, just snare drum playing. People would think I'm nuts because I start off really loud playing and then really soft for like in half an hour and then do some excerpts and go on. But after all, since I always see myself as a classical trained musician, so when we analyze music differently and we will look at forms and texture and motive and Fung, you bring something today and you want to share a little bit how a composer, also classical training in a way, that how we put the composition and analyze that together.
Well, I think we all kind of have had to write quite substantial compositions, and also we, in different positions, had to kind of evaluate different people's compositions. And so it's interesting to see what we get excited about in music and how we would recommend people to do maybe in the process of creativity. Everyone says there's no right and wrong, and that is very true. But at the same time, I think there are some little guidelines, or actually little things that we probably look for when we encounter a new composition. Maybe it's by a student composer, maybe it's a master composer, and I mean that's the excitement of going to a premiere, right? And you don't know what you're expecting, but during the process of listening, the first time, and then if you're lucky, subsequent listenings, you try to pick up certain things, and these are the things that we probably are excited to find out. Maybe the relationship between things that happen early on in a piece, how it relates to something in the middle, to the end, and just different materials. And in terms of, for myself, I'm really interested in composing and finding a way to create a sense of coherence in a composition, maybe within a movement or even within a larger arch of things. And what I would like to recommend for maybe younger composers to look out for is simply think about how the different materials relate to each other within a fixed duration, within the duration of the composition. So I usually recommend a beginner composer to look at two compositions in particular. One is Density 21.5 by Varese for solo flute. The other one is Cirex by Debussy, also for solo flute. Because without the complicated orchestration, you see it very clearly what happens in the music. So I thought I would use the Debussy work as a little example of what I mean by having materials that appear and then reoccur, and how it could help develop a coherent whole. So maybe we could have a very quick listen to, say, the first minute of the Debussy first.
Yes, I think we're ready. I think we can get a roll.
So what we heard is the opening minute of this composition, and firstly, I think you will agree that right from the very first note, it creates a very specific environment, atmosphere. And the opening bar already, that is a very recognizable motif that you could hear. And if you look at the score, you see that that comes back every now and then. But firstly, let's just look at the overall structure, which is a very simple A, B, A. We can have a look at that score now. You see the elements from A comes back at the end, and then actually there's a little bit of B at the very end of the work. Now we can look at the next slide, which is the one that showcases the structural tone of the composition. Basically, Debussy's music is not as traditionally tonal as as we would refer to from the older time. So basically, each bar you could see or you could analyze it and find out there's a particular tone that is the key of that bar. And in this work, there are actually only 3 pitches. And most of the bars you could find that is B flat. B flat is by far the central tone of this composition, and it appears in section A, also section B. And for a few bars, it deviates to E flat and D flat. And there are, of course, a few bars that you cannot really identify a central tone. And these are the bars that make this composition very interesting, usually. And then if you look at the chart, you'll see that B flat comes back when the A section comes back. But at the very end of this composition, there's actually kind of a memory of section B, and is pitched around D flat. And that shows you how coherent this composition is. It's only a 2-3 minutes work. And for the motifs, I also picked out 2 key motifs in this composition. And you can see in this chart that the first motif is very recognizable. It comes back many times, especially in section A. And then the other one is the lower pitched motif. It also comes in during the section B, and again at the very end, kind of the memory of section B. So this is just a very quick demonstration of how a composition could be kind of constructed with just a few key elements that reoccur. This gives the audience a sense of coherence and something to grab hold onto, instead of a full composed work where everything happens only once. Of course, there's some composition that is very exciting that is like that, but in general, to create a sense of coherence, I would like to think that some elements that recur usually help creating that sense. But having said that, if you have composed a composition with these elements coming back at different time, it does not make it a good composition. Usually what makes a good composition is the things that you cannot really explain. But having these, I think, would lay a quite good foundation. I don't know what you guys think, but
maybe some music theorists would disagree with you, saying you can't explain it. We're always looking for the explanation. What makes this work? What makes this beautiful? But yeah, I think
I mean, I really like seeing things that happens again and again, things that happens only twice, things that only happen once, and in the composition, and that actually for me is quite fulfilling. I also would like to share some ideas. I wrote a piece inspired by The Origin of Species, which is about evolution. And of course, evolution is about certain genes, certain animals, some becomes extinct and some kind of blossoms into bigger families. And in that work, I did exactly that. Basically, some ideas maybe only comes out once or twice, and then it becomes extinct, and some materials develops into longer, so-called more beautiful phrases. And that is, for me, a way of creating a work that kind of binds together, regardless of the duration. If it's only 2-3 minutes, I think you can get away with a work that is more full composed. But if it's a 20 minutes or even longer work, then some signposts are usually quite helpful. At least that's what I think.
I think it's about how you guys kind of create the momentum and anticipations as a performer, and we have to put it in the right place. That often we just want to learn the score, but without really studying that. So I think we all should pay more attention to the process of creativity. That's why our conversation happened tonight. And the longer the phrase it is, not just about the story or the idea behind that, but how we presented that is important in a way, I think.
I think when you look at even compositions by Ligeti, for example, when you analyze them, you can, for some of them, you can work out exactly what he did. Like maybe some roles or that kind of ideas. You can work out, but it's the way that he used these materials that made them masterpieces. That's what I want to mention also. I mean, it's easy to analyze and see what someone has done, but I think there are still things that you cannot explain.
Oh, so do I.
There are things that purely came from the composer's mind. Usually those are the things that make a piece special in my mind.
Matthew, do you have a special piece?
I have many special pieces, yes, but you asked us only to pick one for tonight. So I think there is a kind of slide that's going to introduce the piece. I guess what I was thinking about, if I wanted to give some younger composers some ideas about what I think is important in a piece, I really think, and my students, they probably are driven crazy by me asking them these questions over and over again, but I think the first issue in the piece is really, what is the mood, or what is the emotion or atmosphere of this music that we're hearing? And I think that we don't, as listeners or as an audience, we don't have a lot of time to establish that. I think we have about 2 seconds, maybe, like 1 or 2 seconds, not 10 seconds or 1 minute, something like that. We need to be given some instant communication through the sound of what the landscape is, what is the energy or emotion or impact of this music. So one of the composers who I think does that really, really well is the great 20th century Polish composer Ludosławski. He's a composer who I recommend everybody listen to his works. He has beautiful orchestral music and chamber music. And his music is, I think, very, he makes his, like all the great composers, he makes his own kind of world that he operates in. And we're able to identify his language and that this is his music very, very fast. So the piece that I chose for today is a quite short piece for violin and piano. It is called Subito, and you guys know that means suddenly. This is one of his last works. It's from 1992. And when we hear the beginning of this piece, we'll listen to about a minute of it. I think there are several things that I want you to think about. The first one, as I said, is that we get an instant character or mood from this piece. It starts very, very fast with violin running notes going down like that, and then a big piano chord. We get fast, loud energy, running notes, big power, strength. Then total shift, just like the idea of subito. We have very small fragments, quiet, and then we move on to something new, the total opposite of all of that, which is much slower music, lyrical, long, sustained, singing sounds in the violin, and some other gestures in the piano, which actually are connected with the opening material. So I think one of the things that all the great pieces do is they do a lot with a little bit of music in many cases. Some composers actually do a lot with a lot of music. I was thinking about that too, like maybe Berio, Sinfonia. That has a lot, and he does a lot with it. But other pieces, you can fit a lot into a tiny span of time. So it's very flexible in the material. So this is about 1 minute or so of the opening of this piece, Subito, by Ludoslawski.
Oh, it's very interesting that it's like when we do something really quick, a lake of xylophone glockenspiel runs, and mention about the character emotions of the music. That I think for percussion music that we have our actual function to adding colors and being at the moment. So I was recently listening quite a bit of Mahler, that remembering my past career in orchestra. And the Mahler 6, the Hammer, is one of the moments that is visually it's important, and then emotionally it just hit me every time. And then since we know the music as well as a player, as a music lover, and you always question why is not the third hammer is being there. I mean, we know the story and the reason why behind that, but every time even the third hammer is not there, your brain can hear that. And I think what being interested as a performer to create something is not just we understand the music, analyze the music, but the gesture. You know, when we think about the hammer piece and Mahler orchestra, and we've been discussing among our colleagues, and I think last year the Seoul Philharmonic did it. So Edward Choi, my friend, the principal there, was thinking how should he make that being more theatrical, and then we came up with using flour or baby powders on the platform. So when you really get up and then really bam, and then you see the smoke coming out. But I think for percussionists nowadays, we think a lot about gesture, how we use our body language to be part of the music as a performance. So lately, some people we even call themselves sound artists, a performer, not just musicians now. So I think many pieces written for percussionists involve gesture, and Tim, you were talking about something with gesture with me before, and then I think the table music is something we come across with quite a lot, and you have your own perspective. Would you like to share a little bit of that?
Sure. Like everyone here, you know, I have a lot of important pieces in my life, but especially apropos percussion music, and thinking of these 3 compositions that we saw for the competition. I really was thinking of Thierry Demay's table music, written in 1987. This is a piece that very explicitly sort of asks the audience to pay as much, if not more, attention to the visual aspect of performance, moving beyond pitch, rhythm, you know, purely musical parameters, to really look at what is happening. And it's a piece that acknowledges that in all performance of music, there has to be, or human performance of music, there has to be a body present. And this piece is largely choreography. It's sort of a composed out dance for the hands, in which sound is something that happens almost as like subsidiary consequence of the movements that the musician and the percussionists undertake. I mean, you could actually think of all music in that way. Even a Chopin piano piece, it's like the sound happens because the hand is coming down onto the key. But this sort of, it opens up a whole new wealth of meaning that music can be imbued with when you start to think about the physical element, the visual element. And when we see this piece, you can see how it's the potential for meaning beyond the actual music that we hear is very, very rich. Maybe we could just take a look at the video, about 45 seconds of this performance. So maybe we could look at a slide of the score of this piece. The snippets of the score that we have don't correspond to the actual sections of the piece that we heard in the video, but it gives an idea of the kind of notation that the composer had to come up with to create this hand choreography. But this kind of zooming out from this piece in particular, I think we'll see that all of the pieces in this composition competition, in which the composers were explicitly asked to use everyday objects, objects that themselves can be imbued with certain kinds of meaning.
Right.
I think the same sort of elements are automatically involved in all of these pieces, whether or not the composers knew about this particular work. I think we'll all agree that composing is hard. And
I agree.
One thing that helps me out when I get stuck is to think about things beyond the music. And this can really help composers at any stage to push things along. In a related point, thinking about the success, the artistic success, the artistic failure of a particular work or even a particular passage in music, when I, as a listener or audience member, hear a piece, see a piece for the first time, I kind of have I'm looking for something that is, on one hand, beautiful, but on the other hand, interesting, something that makes me think in one way or another. And sometimes that, what makes you think can just be it can be musical, it can be derived purely from musical parameters. But it opens up a wealth of possibility when we start incorporating these other elements. Ligeti, you mentioned Ligeti. Ligeti says that whatever your solution is, it has to be beautiful. But I would almost say that I would rather it be interesting than beautiful.
I think beautiful is different for each person. What's beautiful for Ligeti may not be the same for for a film composer or something like that. And I think I was thinking there are music that I respect, but that I may not wish especially to listen to. But then there are music that I really do enjoy listening to, and I find it kind of like that. There's music that I really respect because they, like Matthew said, they instantly create a world that has not been created before. There are compositions like that, but I may not choose to listen to that composer's work because maybe it's just so far out. But then I respect composers like that, and I think I will always encourage students or younger composers to try to create that world, so-called a world that is more personal, more unique. And I think when you listen to a new work, I would love to be excited by things that I have not encountered before, things that you cannot explain maybe immediately. There are moments that you just want to, after the concert, find the score and see what that composer has done. Maybe it's still with an orchestra, maybe it's still just a piano solo, but somehow they find a way to create that sound that you have not heard before. And I think as a composer, I like to think that we compose and we would like to think that our compositions contribute a tiny little bit to that genre, be it string quartet or maybe that's difficult, or like orchestral or other chamber music.
I mean, but you see that the score just then, actually the composer created new notations as well. So I was fortunate to perform the light music by Dumais at one point with John Geoffroy at the Hong Kong the French May Festival a couple of years ago. So one of the circle thing we just saw, actually it's an actual hand gesture that it came back all the time. So we have all this like memorized that kind of built in already. When we look at that as a percussionist, we know how it is, how many fingers, which hand, the palm, which direction it is. So for me, that is beautiful because we make no sound as a percussionist at that point. So, but the movement itself, how we're gonna do the movement together, make it right in rhythm without sound is something difficult. And then we did that production at the APA amphitheaters with just the headlight, just sitting in hand. And then we kind of cheated with the score in that because we only have short time to rehearse together. But it was a great experience. And that I really appreciate that everyone will learn from that beyond just playing the notes. And thanks for you guys mentioning about the composition competition. I think we should be going into explaining what we did for the past few months, and also the composition competition actually is a part of TICA. So before we start to explain, I would like to thank you guys again for your time and dedications as the jury, and especially with Matthew and Tim, we spend the most time to sorting out the 18 approved applicant to 11, and then we select the final 5, and then we came up the final 3 for the final juries. It's an interesting process that we spend time discussing what we like and what we don't like before hearing them. And the composition competition this year is very special because when we think about what kind of instrumentation we wanted, in the first year we focus on the main theme of the academy, which is string and percussion, so we have cello and timpani. And then last year we wanted to start experiment the trio repertoire because looking into percussion repertoire, there's either duo or quartet or sextet. I mean, we have trio repertoire, but not many. So we were experimenting trio instrumentation. And this year, after discussing with Ken Ueno from UC Berkeley, our creative director in residence, he was saying we should do something in response to the current situations. So we were calling for objects that you find at home and also able to put in a suitcase. So imagining at one point we can travel again on tour, that we can bring one of the pieces in a suitcase and go ahead. And so hence this idea is really thank Ken to kind of helping us to shape this. And we did encourage a lot of young composers that to kind of get out of their comfort zone. We have interesting submissions. Even today, masterclasses, one of the participants come back is the PlayStation controller and then the ramen set, and these are things that are very interesting that we normally don't hear that and see that in concert hall setting, but we'll be great to hear that. And before we move on for the 3 finalist pieces, and I'd like to thank all the jury, and we have William Craft as our honorary jury. Bill Craft is known for writing percussions. He also was the former timpanist of the Los Angeles Philharmonics, and I get to work with him because my 2 former teachers, David Herbert and Jim Bosno, are both playing his concertos, and so I get a chance to work really closely with him during my student time to record 2 of the concertos understudy with the piano recording. And he always encouraged people to play percussion with other instruments. So his Encanto series have something with harp and also with saxophone that I enjoy playing all of these, that kind of expanding my ears as a performer. It's not just to play with the drummer and percussionist as always. And of course our head jury, Ken Ueno, that kind of oversees the whole thing shaping for the past 3 years, that we hope to use TPICC, Toolbox Percussion International Composition Competition, to connect more young composers, to have rooms to experiment to new things. And the other jury is Nathan Stuckey, and he's famous for one of his pieces called The Composer is Dead. And I worked with Nate in San Francisco during one of his residency at the San Francisco Dome. So basically he picked up trash and making instruments that we actually make a piece in percussion ensemble, that his ideas are inspiring and interesting and educational. And Fung brought him into Hong Kong when you were working with the Hong Kong Phil. That was a great concert. And so I'm glad you guys are here, that kind of bringing us and the world together at this time. And without further ado, I think we should hear something related to the table music. I think I picked the order for the 3 finalists to be premiere here online. So the first piece is interesting, that using comb for your hair. And let's listen to that piece.
Hello, I'm Winfred from Hong Kong. Nice to meet you all. And in my piece, I choose the comb for the instrument because this is the comb that I have at home. For the comb, besides you can hit it to make sound, you can also have at least 2 types of scratching sound. So that's the sound I used in my piece. When I start composing, when I look at the comb, and I have linked it up with the barcodes because it also has some stripes. I go online and generate 3 types of barcodes with the words comb. Then I print the barcodes out and plot the 3 barcodes on the graph paper, and then I enlarge it and try to find out some patterns and also gesture within the barcode. So the barcodes become the structural fundamental plan for my work. In my piece, I'm trying to exploring my understanding on how to transforming some visual sense of space into the sense of sounding. And I'm actually having a lot of fun while I'm composing this piece, and I hope everyone enjoy when you have a chance to listen it later. So thank you very much.
So what do you guys think?
Well, let me start first. I think it's very interesting that he used the barcode to generate some rhythmic materials. I think this kind of echoes what Tim said earlier. When you're stuck or when you're looking for materials, why not look at non-musical elements? And it's always very fun to find a non-musical theme or idea and try to find your own way to translate it into the music that you write. So that's my main comment about
Well, it's interesting that the compositional material itself is actually a found object.
Yes.
In that sense.
I think it's very interesting because as a listener, without reading the program notes, you would not know. But it is interesting enough for the composer to find process that, to generate materials that way. And I've done the same, and I'm sure you have all.
Have you?
Yeah, well, just following up on that, I think that connects with what you were saying earlier about maybe in theory something could be perfect, but that is not enough to make it a good piece. So we can have this very interesting background on the piece, and that can generate certain things, but we still need to configure them and do the right things with them to make it work. One of the things that I think works really well in this piece is that, well, first of all, I want to say with all these pieces, I enjoyed them a lot because I learned things while listening to these pieces, and I couldn't myself have written these exact works. One of the things that impresses me in this piece is that although we have three of the same objects, these three exact combs, they're not different types of combs. It's not like comb in D or they're not different sizes. They're all the exact same comb. But I think if I were listening to this without seeing what they're using, I might actually imagine that there are even more instruments than just these three objects. And I think that's because all the different sounds and different techniques that he has come up with for this object, they give the impression of much more happening. And I think that's a very strong point in this music.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think when we picked this piece that we debated a little bit because there's another piece similar ideas but different objects. But when we wanted to sting what we want, and we picked this piece. And the next piece we're going to look into something about motive that you bring in earlier. So let's listen to the second piece.
Hello, this is Orestes Papaioannou, and I'm the composer of the piece 1, 2, 3, Go. As seen from the title, number 3 is a vital idea for the piece, as there are 3 percussionists who play on 3 different everyday objects, and those objects can be found in a kitchen or at a dinner table, and they are bottles, cans, and plates. Compositionally, the piece consists of 2 parts. At the first part, there is a canonic exposition of 3 rhythms in the philosophy of a more abstract interlocking technique, and I think that this derived as a result from my experience at the Balinese gamelan orchestra. So there are rhythmical patterns which grow, fade, and lead from almost silence to a very dense and intense peak. The second part comes as a contrast to the first heavily contrapuntal texture, and is basically a dance-like unisono fanfare, where some simple rhythmical patterns alternate between the instruments. Maybe a phenomenon similar to a kaleidoscope, where you can see some patterns rotating over and over again. I thank Toolbox Percussion, and I'm really looking forward to the performance.
3, go! One, two, three, go!
Well, I remember when we looking at this piece that Matthew and Tim and I was talking about this piece actually written in a way that I would say this is the clearest from all the applicants that we have, and because the motive is really nicely written on the score, it's really clear as a performance. What do you guys think now after seeing it?
It's interesting that you mentioned clarity, because I think that he's in a way, he's kind of going for, at least in the first couple of sections, he's going for a composed out unclarity. It's just, he's using repeated elements, but layering them in a way, gradually layering them in a way that creates a very sort of unpredictable pointillistic texture. Mm-hmm. I kind of get the sense of a rainstorm building up on a tin roof for those first couple of sections. And then it's not until the last section that we get kind of a recognizable groove, a recognizable pulse And then there are these very interesting things that happen in between the sections where the music stops and the players say, 1, 2, 3, go. How do you feel about these?
I think first about the notation that you were talking about, I think that there's a question about different types of complexity, or something that looks complex on the page, but when we hear it, it's quite clear or obvious that we have these different kinds of swells and different shapes that we go through. And then one of the kind of unpredictable aspects, at least that's my feeling about it, is when we kind of get used to something, sometimes then that's interrupted with this spoken 1, 2, 3, go. And that 1, 2, 3, go can take us into different places. So it's interesting, I think.
Well, I try not to think too much about the 1, 2, 3, go. I just see it as like letting us know it's the second movement or third movement. And well, I enjoy hearing the build-up of the layers. That's the main thing about this piece, I think. And after the first 2 sessions where it doesn't add up to a more audible groove, once we get to the last movements, last section where you get to hear that groove is very welcome. Yeah.
Interesting to hear the tone color. For us, when we rehearsed that, we were discussing about, he actually is the only person using 3 sets of the same object, that he didn't really specific what it is. So there was a creative process between us, that finding the bottles and the cans, and then fitting the sound, and then we able to rehearse through a Zoom sessions. But I hope we deliver the best we can with the situations.
It's a great sound palette. It's great.
So that was the performer's choice.
Yes.
Am I correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
The performance choice, yeah. From what we have, yeah.
Yeah.
And last piece we're going to hear tonight will be something related to gesture. So it's a very interesting piece using Tai Chi fan, 3 sets of them. And let's make a roll.
Hi, I'm Jane. The piece I composed is for 3 foldable fans. This fan could be a kind of weapon, but in general, it's kind of sport or a type of Chinese kung fu. When the players play the fans, there will be no sound unless they unfold the fan like this. So at the very beginning of the composition, I drew this to record the Tai Chi movements. Well, the movements are silent, but with a lot of inner energy. So I tended to express the energy in an artistic way so that people could feel that by listening. The next step is to explore the possibilities on the fan. I listed all the materials and arranged the possible combinations. I don't need to use all of them, actually. What I need to do is to choose the combination which fits the piece. So the core of this piece is about the flow and the relationship between space and sound. Even when you have a pause, it doesn't mean that music has stopped. The inner energy is invisible, but still exists.
So that was the last piece of the 3 finalists. When we picked the score, there's an actual handwritten score, I remember. And we have a lot of discussions, and Matthew remember mentioned about the durations, and you're concerned about the length of the piece. Yeah. Remember we will share some of that?
Well, what I remember when we looked at the score with this piece is I didn't know exactly what to expect from the kind of sound world in this piece, and I'm glad that we trusted ourselves because I think it sounds very interesting, the whole piece. One of the things that I like about this piece, kind of like the first piece, is that the composer is making many different types of sounds with these objects. And one thing that I think is a little different in this piece is that for me, it has a certain amount of tension as the piece goes along. I feel like I don't always know what's going to happen, and there are some small surprises that are working out very well. And the other thing, I think that everybody probably wants to say this, but this is the piece that is kind of like the choreography work, and I could easily imagine this like with lighting or some other type of staging, like moving around to different locations.
Cool.
No, I think it's a very strong piece, and she manages to use the chosen object fully, just like the composer. So, and visually very stunning as well.
I think it's also a piece that gives the performer really like a huge opportunity to be a performer, to be a human being in the room. And so, you know, something for the for percussionists to really like to really work at, to live the piece.
Right. Yeah.
In a way that's like the same demands are not placed on the players in the other 2 pieces.
Well, thank you guys for all the comment, and of course the jury duty. And besides thanking all the juries, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank our 3 players from Toolbox Percussions, Ivan, Brian, and Alvin. And we spent a lot of time, and they spent a lot of time themselves as well to try to explore how to interpret this piece. And I would like to also thank all the other participants who submit the score, no matter you are finalists or not. That it's a creative process that we all get together at the situations. Now let's move on. If we have any question and comment from the floor or from our Zoom room and or the Facebook chat box. We have one question from Yvonne. Is there any interesting elements that you would like to put into your next exciting investment? I'm not sure what, Yvonne, can you elaborate a little bit more of the investment of The instruments or ideas or anything?
Exciting. Is there any? So the answer is yes.
And yes, yeah.
Yes is the answer.
Yes, yes. I think investment into ideas. I think to try to listen more for me and. Kobe, in the newly composed pieces, how would you make sure your ideal picture of the piece can be presented in the performance when you are not able to be physically presented in the rehearsals?
That's very, very hard. The only thing we have is the pieces of paper that we give the musician in that case. And so you have to do as clear a job of telling what you want on the page. And this is something that, you know, it takes years and years of practice and training to get it right. Something that beginning composers, you know, something that we work on a lot with beginning composers.
Yes, I think it's very important to be able to decode your idea from your mind onto paper, onto musical notations that performers who don't know you, who have no access to you, can perform that work. In general, I think that's how I would approach composition, and it's a very important skill to have. And actually, it's not only about not being able to be physically present. Sometimes even when you're there in front of the musicians, there's no guarantee that they would do what you want them to do. Maybe with a chamber group, it's easier to convey your idea, but if you have an orchestra in front of you, actually there's very little time to really polish everything. So make it clear as possible on the score. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I don't think that notation is a separate skill from composing. I think that when we are composing, that means we are notating something, and that's everything we notate is its own special decision. The thing that I have learned in my long age is that some things that I wrote earlier were a little bit more complicated than they actually needed to be. And so I gradually find myself writing things that are 10% a little bit simpler in certain directions. Yeah.
We do have one last question on the Facebook chat. What are the key elements to a successful composer's talent, creativity, or hard work? Or all of them are equal importance?
Well, how do you define success? Do you define success artistically? Do you define it like how, you know, how amazing your career is? I think that in addition to those elements that you list, like if you want success in a career sense, like being able to put yourself out there, being able to toot your own horn is a very, very important skill for career building. And it's, you know, I think for a lot of us, it's the one that we least like. Maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but
I agree. I agree completely.
There, plus being able to toot your own horn.
Especially when you just graduated or something, no one is going to look for you. You need to be. You need to find the chance to present your work to the right level of presenters, performers. That's what I would recommend all the young composers. That's what I say all the time in interviews. No one is going to come to find you unless you have had already established something. Just find the time to build up your portfolio, I think. I would like to say that it's important, the quality of the composition, but at the same time, you need to make the right connection and get your music out there.
Is there any last thought?
Well, I'll just say that thanks so much for having us here on this panel. I found all the three pieces really inspiring, interesting to think about.
Yeah. And thank you guys, and the time, not just about the panel, but the whole process that we go through the creative process. And I think we're running out of time for tonight, and would like to thank everyone tuning in here tonight. And just a little housekeeping, and also the festival is still going on. And tomorrow night, we will be having our digital gala concert live. You can still purchase the concert pass. As well as next week, we have a key feature performance lecture, which is our second performance lecture. It's presented by the Synergy Percussion from Australia. And once again, I want to thank everyone tuning in and our funders' support and your audience. And we hope to see you again live next year at the TICA Festival back in Hong Kong. And for now, please stay healthy and robust. And have a good night, good day, and good evening. Thank you.
Hello from Sydney, Australia. We are Synergy Percussion. We're very excited to be involved with Toolbox Percussion and the Toolbox International Creative Academy Festival. My name is Joshua Hill.
My name is Timothy Constable.
I'm Rebecca Lagos, and we'll be joined by our colleague Mark Robinson in a program of all Australian percussion music.
So the first work on the program, Peter Sculthorpe's How the Stars Were Made. It's a very early work by Australian percussion standards. It's from 1971. It's actually older than Synergy. Synergy was formed in 1974. The next piece is Nigel Westlake's On Philo-Centric Lecture, which may even be known to some of you. It's a very famous piece. And the next one is a work of mine from 2009. It's called Last Waltz. It's a piece for 4 drummers. And finally, a work by Tristan Coelho. It's called The Smell of the Earth. It's from 2016 and involves a lot of found objects and tactile sort of way of creating sound. So we thought that keyed in well with the themes of the festival. So we're looking forward. See you there.
Thank you.